Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Welcome to the new set. No, it's not much, but it's better than just staring at a blank wall. So, got some posters up behind me, got the new couch here. Eventually, there will be more posters added to the wall as I get them. And as you can see, I got a shelf behind me, so I'm going to start putting some nerd stuff up there just so you guys got new stuff to look at every so often. But anyway, today we're here to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Finally got around to seeing it. Again, sorry about the delay. Hopefully I'm getting caught up on editing fairly quickly here. As of the time of this recording, I think I'm still like 4 videos behind. So hopefully I'll get those caught up this week and you guys will see this fairly quickly. So what did I think of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? Part of me liked it and part of me found it rather repetitive, and the whole style of the Avengers verse is getting a little stale and I think they need to shake it up a little bit. The thing that made the Avengers verse interesting at first was you had different styles coming out of the movies. Like you had Hulk, which was the start of it all, which still kind of looked like the idea of a comic book movie. You had the sliding panels. It looked like a comic book being put onto the screen for the first time. And then you came into Iron Man, which was a lot of fancy CGI and stuff. Then you had Captain America, which was a period piece. Then you came up to Thor, which was kind of eh. And then you came into Avengers, which finally brought everyone together, which was cool. Then we started Phase 2, and it's like, okay, we got a couple more Iron Man films, another Thor film. Okay, they're building up all this, the Infinity Gauntlet stuff with the Infinity Stones, and things are kind of moving along. Then Age of Ultron happened, and again, that wasn't without its flaws, but it still worked for what they were doing. And then we came to Doctor Strange. I'm like, okay, so now we're dipping backwards into origin stories, which is understandable for parts of this, but at the same time, they could have established it more like they did with Spider-Man, where he just kind of already existed and kind of moved forward and kind of like told his backstory through other means. Kind of, again, like I said, they should have done with Captain America. The thing I didn't like about Captain America, the First Avenger, was once we flashed back into his origin, that's where we stayed until the end, where I would have rather have seen them kind of flashing between 2 points. Like here he is in modern time, and what he's going through relates back to his origin story, so it's like a back and forth, which they didn't do. And with Doctor Strange, again, I think it's just because I knew enough of his origin story that I was kind of bored with seeing it again, and that had they like had him already established as Doctor Strange, but he's going through an event that recants his origin and kind of went back and forth with it, I think it probably would have played a little bit better in my opinion. But now we're into Guardians 2, and it's like, okay, so we're just rehashing kind of the same thing. We've got the Guardians, they're already together, so there's not that whole dynamic of how they came together, which is what made the first one good. It's like, okay, now they're all established, and what's the focus of this one? Okay, well, they're basically mercenaries for hire, more or less. It's like, oh, somebody was called because these creatures are attacking their world. Okay, we'll come and defend you for a price, a reward, whatever. The only upside of it was once we finally got into the main focus of the movie, which was Star-Lord finally meets his father, who in this version is Ego, the Living Planet, who is played by Kurt Russell. Having him as a physical form, saying that, I was this giant space entity, I'm a celestial, whatever, and I formed this planet around my consciousness, and then through the planet, I was able to stem what I thought life would look like, and I'm able to channel myself into this being. And yes, I traveled out to Earth and met your mother and blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, well, why did you leave? He's like, well, this form has to return to the planet every so often to re-energize, otherwise it'll just crumble into dirt and disappear. And he's like, well, why didn't you ever come back? And he says, I did several times, and the last time I knew that if I came back, I would never leave again. It shows that Ego did actually love Star-Lord's mother, but he's Ego, so he's more self-driven than emotionally driven, so he knew that if he let himself go, he would no longer be himself, and he would basically be ending his own life to have a moment in time with her, and he couldn't let that happen because he's Ego. So that's why he ended up leaving and never coming back. But when Star-Lord's mother died, he felt that it was time for his son to be with him. But then, again, I don't want to spoil too much in the movie, but you find out through the course of events the reason Yondu never delivered Star-Lord to Ego. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but there is a reason he was never delivered. And that's kind of the main focus of the movie and how everything plays out. Again, I don't want to spoil too much of it because it is still a good film. I wasn't bored watching it. I just kind of wish they would have done something else with it. Like I said, once we got involved with Ego, it got kind of interesting, but then we're still trying to wrap up so many loose ends of the previous Guardians movie that it kind of took away from the overall story, in my opinion. I don't really know how much more I can go into detail about that without ruining a lot of what happens in the movie. But yeah, overall, I'm still looking forward to seeing where they're going with the rest of the Avengers universe with whatever's left of this phase that they're in and the next phase, where it's going to go into Infinity War and then whatever's after Infinity War and so on, and how the Guardians are eventually going to tie into all of that. But at the same time, I feel that they're stuck in this formula now. It's like the same thing that kind of happened with Ant-Man. Ant-Man was being developed long before they decided to do this Marvel universe. And Ant-Man was originally going to be its own standalone thing. And then Marvel was like, well, if we're doing Infinity War and we're doing the Avengers, Ant-Man is an Avenger. So why don't we just let them make the movie the way they're making it, but we'll work in a little bit of a story change so it ties into our universe. But the problem with that was it was being done by the same guy who did Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and he wanted Ant-Man to look like a comic, which past Hulk, Marvel Studios was kind of moving away from. It's like, let's make it more live action, more realistic, more gritty, without being like Nolan's Dark Knight universe, but let's move away from the whole sliding comic panel thing and just like make it, okay, we're in a real world and this stuff is happening. And the one thing I liked about the sliding comic panels in Hulk was it was showing you two different angles of the same thing in the same scene, instead of like cutting back and forth between, okay, here's Bruce Banner's point of view and here's like General Ross's point of view. It would slide the panels in and have both of them looking like at each other, and then the other part of the panel would be what each of them were seeing across from each other. And I thought it was just a really artistic way of tying comic books into the live action films, but at the same time showing things in one shot that you would normally have to cut back and forth between multiple shots of. And Marvel decided to move away from that and just stick with the, oh, we'd rather just cut between multiple shots because we can pad our movies out to 3 hours that way, or whatever the case may be. And with Ant-Man, they're like, well, he wants to do it more comic booky, like what we're trying to move away from, and that was what the whole fight was, where he eventually stepped down from the movie, and they picked up whatever he had already developed and just kind of rewrote it to fit into their whole Marvel universe now. And again, I still like the Ant-Man movie the way it came out. It was fun. It was different because we got to explore some different stuff that isn't just your average superpower of I have super strength or I can fly or whatever. Ant-Man took you into a different direction, and he's a more unique character. He has more dimensions than some of the other characters who just kind of get stale after a while. But at the same time, it fell into the whole Marvel formula of this is what we're doing, and every movie's going to look exactly the same. And I think that's starting to get too repetitive for my personal taste, and I think it's getting redundant. And I think it's actually kind of what hurt Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Again, I'm not saying I didn't like Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Like I said, once you get past all the crap and get to the Ego storyline, it was fine, but they were still trying to shoehorn in little things that will come into play later or tie up loose ends from the previous films and kind of work everything together to, hey, Infinity War is coming up fast and this is what you have to know to get there. And shoehorning all that in, I think, took away from the overall plot. And that's not to mention that they need to squeeze in not one, not two, not three, but 5 freaking after the credits sequences to cap off, like, oh, hey, we forgot to mention this is what's going on too. Like, you meet these characters at the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 that the Guardians are working for, they get paid, they fuck off, and then they kind of tie back into things later on. But then by the end of the movie, they were there solely to establish the character of Adam Warlock, who, if you've ever read Infinity Gauntlet, you'll know who Adam Warlock is, unlike the guy who was walking out of the theater behind me talking to his girlfriend, or whoever, his group of friends, whoever they were, because I guess he was supposed to be the comic nerd in their group of friends. So he's like, oh yeah, well this relates to this, and this ties into this, and this, like doing that whole thing. But then he's like, but I don't remember who Adam is. I think that's Captain Marvel. Okay, clearly you don't know anything about comic books as much as you're trying to say you do. You read some shit off Wikipedia. You might know a little bit about current history or something that you saw on some video on YouTube, but you don't know shit about the comics. Otherwise, you would know who Adam Warlock is, and you would know that he's not Captain Marvel. So, Yeah, there is a setup for Adam Warlock finally appearing, but they said it's probably not going to be until after Infinity War, which both makes sense but doesn't make sense because in the comics it was Adam Warlock who finally defeated Thanos for the Infinity Gauntlet, if I'm remembering it correctly. It's been several years since I've read the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, but that's possibly going to lead into the fourth Avengers film, which means what's going to happen during the Infinity War if Thanos isn't defeated. If you're setting up Adam Warlock, it has to be for a reason, which tells me that Infinity War might be the Empire Strikes Back of the Avengers verse. It's going to be the one where it ends on a decline to set up the next movie and going forward from there. So again, like I said, it's not really that I didn't like the film, it's just that I feel some of the stuff's getting repetitive and stale, and I wish they would go back to shaking it up a little bit. But at the same time, we just still got a lot of stuff to look forward to. We still got Thor Ragnarok, which is actually going to take us back to Asgard and kind of go into the Planet Hulk storyline with Gladiator Hulk. So we got that to look forward to, which should be a little bit of a change up because we're going to be on Asgard versus Earth. We do still have Black Panther coming up. I'm not sure what else is coming up beyond that because I know they've decided to do Inhumans as a TV series now instead of as a movie, which might be the better choice, but might not. I know we got Ant-Man and Wasp, which that'll be fun to revisit, but again, is going to fall victim to the same thing that Guardians 2 did, where it's just more repetitive of the same stuff, just to further along a plot line in another unrelated movie. Yeah, so I don't think I really spoiled too much of the film. As much as it sounds like I didn't like it, I did like it. Like I said, there was just a few too many little cut over here and like let's wrap up this storyline instead of staying focused on the ego story. The ego story was really what was interesting about this. I mean, the other stuff has its place. It was just detracting. It really should have been like Act 1, we're going to talk about this. Act 2 will be this. Act 3 will be this. And Act 3 could have kind of wrapped everything up in one, brought whatever the other stories were together. But instead of doing that, it's just like, let's just keep chopping everything in here and then we'll cut over here. It's like, it'll be a real tense moment about what's going to happen. It's like, oh, let's cut over to the other story and see what's going on there. And it's like, why? You could have wrapped this up and then went over to that, or established that before we developed all this tense emotion here, just to cut away from it and break the pace of the movie. Again, not saying I didn't like it, just there's certain things about it that bugged me. So what would I give this one as far as a star rating? For me, this one is going to get a 3. And again, it's not saying I didn't enjoy it. It was still fun, but it's not a 4 like the previous one was. It could easily be a 3.5, but like I said, they break pacing a few times to try and cover different things that they really could have covered differently. And there's a lot of repetition from every other Marvel film that's out. Am I getting superhero burnout? I don't know. I'll let you know after I see Wonder Woman and wherever the DC universe is going to go. But strangely, I'm actually looking forward to more of the DC universe now, even though it's had a few misses and Marvel's been all hits. I feel like I'm just might be getting burned out a little bit on the Marvel stories and want to see more from DC, which is odd because you would feel that if you're burned out on comic book stories in general, you would just kind of be over the comic book stories for a while. But I'm actually looking forward to some of the DC stuff, as long as Warner Brothers doesn't screw with it too much, which I'm already hearing that they might be. But more on that in a future video. So yeah, this one gets a 3 from me. It's just kind of average, and like I said, it's just because everything's kind of getting repetitive and they haven't really done anything new with this one. It has a good element of a story-driven arc, but they keep pulling away from it too much to really keep your focus on one thing, and I think that's part of the problem. So where it would normally probably just have been bumped down to a 3.5 for me, it's getting bumped down to a 3. For me, it's just kind of, it wasn't bad, but I've seen better from Marvel Studios. So yeah, that's it for me. What do you think, little Groot?
I am Groot.
Alright, so as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are down in the description. Click the bell up there in the corner. Make sure you're getting notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, we'll see you after the credits.